Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let me check this. That's good. And here, welcome to you all, and also welcome to all of our many students watching these classes online. We'll continue our study of chapter 17 today. We'll begin with recitation, starting with verse 14. And as always, as I'm chanting, read the translation and then repeat after me. Deva Dvajaguru Prajna, Deva Dvajaguru Prajna, Pujanam Shauchamarjavam, Pujanam Shauchamarjavam, Brahmacharyamahim Sacha, Brahmacharyamahim Sacha, Shariram tapahuchyate, Shariram tapahuchyate, Anudvegakaram vakyam, Anudvega Satyam priyam hitam chayata, Satyam priyam hitam chayata, Swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva, Swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva, Vangmayam tapahuchyate, Vangmayam tapahuchyate, Manah prasada saumyatvam, Manah prasada saumyatvam, Maunamatma vinigraha, Maunamatma vinigraha, Bhava samshuddhirityetata, Bhava samshuddhiretat, Tapo manasamuchyate, Tapo manasamuchyate, Shraddhaya paraya taptam, Shraddhaya paraya tapas tatravidham naraihi, tapas tatravidham naraihi, apalakankshibhir yuktaihi, apalakankshibhir yuktaihi, satvikam parichakshate, satvikam parichakshate, Satkaramana pujartam, Satkaramana pujartam, Tapodambhena chaivayata, Tapodambhena chaivayata, Kriyate tariha proktam, Te tariha proktam, Rajasam chalamadhruvam, Rajasam chalamadhruvam, Mudhagrahenatmano yata, Mudhagrahenatmano yata, Pidaya kriyate tapaha, Pidaya kriyate parasyot sadhanartham va, Parasyot sadhanartham va, Tattamasamudahritam, Tattamasamudahritam. Very good. So, I'll go back to verse 14. So this chapter, Shraddha Traya, 3 kinds of Shraddha. 3 kinds means Sattvika, Rajasa, Tamasa. So we've already seen 3 kinds of Shraddha. We've seen 3 kinds of Ahara, food. We've seen 3 kinds of Yajna, worship, in our past 2 classes. Today, we'll proceed, and we have to see now 3 kinds of tapas, austerities, and 3 kinds of dhanam, 3 kinds of charity. Tapas, we're going to see right now, is an interesting word, because some of you know that the primary meaning for tapas is heat. Then why do we use that word for spiritual austerities, difficult spiritual practices? And the reason is not surprising. Tapas is what cooks you. The idea is you're not very well done yet, and you require some cooking to become spiritually mature. That's the sense. Whatever is required to make you spiritually mature is tapas. Then you become well cooked, well done. Some of you would say, pakka. What does that mean? By the way, pakka is from the Sanskrit, pakwa, having been cooked, is how that word derives. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see 3 kinds of tapas. Before we see sattvika, rajasa, and tamasa tapas, first we're going to see tapas performed with the body, called sharira tapas. Then we're going to see tapas performed orally, vachika tapas. Then we're going to see tapas performed with the mind, manasa tapas. Then we'll see sattva, rajas, and tamas. Deva Dvaja Guru Prajna, Deva Dvaja Guru Prajna, Pujanam Shaucha Marjavam, Pujanam Shaucha Marjavam, Brahmacharya Mahimsacha, Brahmacharya Mahimsacha, Shariram Tapahuchyate, Shariram Tapahuchyate. We'll go from bottom to top in understanding this verse. Last line, shariram means of the sharira, of the physical body. So bodily or physical tapas. The sakara of tapas drops due to grammar rules. Shariram tapas, physical penance or austerities or spiritual practice. Any of those meanings are fine. Uchyate is called. What is called physical austerity? Back up a line. Brahmacharyam. First example, brahmacharyam, chastity, sexual continence. And this depends on your stage of life. So typically we speak of brahmacharya as the first stage of life, followed by grihastashrama, vanaprastha and sannyasashrama. These 4 typical stages of life. Well, brahmacharyam, chastity, is required when you're a student and then as a sannyasi. So it depends on your stage of life. Also, it could mean appropriate sexual activity. Appropriate means non-harmful. Then, ahimsa. This we've discussed several times. A primary guiding principle in following dharma is don't cause harm. And a practical example of it is every time you're going to do something, consider who or what could be harmed by this act. And if you think, if I do this, it might cause this harm or it might cause that harm, then choose to do an act which causes less harm. It's basically the principle of ahimsa, to always choose the course of least harm, ahimsa. And it's up to you to choose. Backing up, shaucham, purity. Now much to say there. So daily bathing. That's interesting. We could extend shaucham, purity, to include other kinds of physical. Actually, that'll kind of go with mental purity. I'm thinking about what you choose to the kinds of media you choose to consume. Media means whatever is on your television set, whatever is on your computer screen, whatever is on your cell phone. What kind of media do you choose to consume? It kind of lapses over into manasa, mental, but we'll take it here. To choose carefully, to be discriminating in what kind of media you choose to consume. Some of it is inappropriate. I'll just leave it at that. It's up to you to choose that which is shaucham, that which is pure, and arjavam, very nice. Whatever you, literally it means straightness, straightforwardness, and simply it means whatever you say, do it. Whatever you do, your speech should be in conformance. So you shouldn't say one thing and do something else. And don't tell me everyone else does. That's obviously no excuse, okay? And the last one here is pujanam, worship. Worship of whom? Devas, gods, dvijas, twice-borns, who were in those days mostly, not all, but mostly teachers. Guru, our spiritual teachers. Prajna, the enlightened ones. Now, pujanam, worship of the gods, at what we do, physical worship of the gods, the puja we do at an altar. Or during yajna, making offerings into a ritual fire. Now here, just to make a point, the teachers, like gurus, that's not the appropriate kind of puja to do to your teachers, to do to your gurus. Teachers don't want you to worship them like you do deities on an altar. And by the way, just a side comment, no, it won't, not necessary. So, teachers don't want your worship. Teachers don't want you to touch their feet. They want you to learn, right? If you want to touch their feet, that's up to you. If you really want to do that, you can. But the best way to serve a teacher, there are actually two ways. First way to serve a teacher is to learn, right? That's what every teacher wants. Second way is if a teacher needs some support, then whatever is the support the teacher needs to continue teaching, you give that support. Seva, we call that. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so that is, by the way, we're going to move through these verses a little more quickly. Hopefully we'll finish both the tapas and what is the last one? Tapas and dhanam. Thank you. My mind is a little dull here. We'll see. Okay, next. Now we have vachika tapas. We finished sharira tapas. Now vachika tapas. Anudvegakaram vakyam. Anudvegakaram vakyam. Satyam priyam hitam chayata. Satyam priyahitam chayata. Swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva. Swadhyayabhyasanam chaiva. Vangmayam tapahuchyate. Vangmayam tapahuchyate. Vak is speech. Here, due to grammar rules, it becomes vangmayam, that which is made of speech. So oral tapas, oral penance, oral spiritual practice, vocal spiritual disciplines. What are they? Go up at the top. Anudvega karam vakyam. It is vakya, speaking things that are un-udvega karam. Udvega means disturbance. Udvega karam, that which causes disturbance. anudvegakaram. Speech that doesn't cause disturbance, specifically speech that doesn't cause harm. In the legal world, they often say that shouting fire in a crowded theater is not covered by your First Amendment rights to free speech. Why? It causes harm. So that's an example. Then these next three, satyam, priyam, hitam, is a classic definition of vak tapas. Vak tapas, vocal austerity, watching what you say. And, for mature people, and especially people on a spiritual path, it seems so obvious that we should be careful about what we say, but oftentimes it's not the case. Just a very blatant example. Would you ever if you're having an argument, do you take your hand and smack that person across the face? Not likely, because you have more control over your body. But tell me, when you start calling this person an idiot and start using these four-letter words, isn't that the vocal equivalent to slapping him? It is. It's every bit as disturbing and harmful as to slap him, but that seems to be more acceptable. Obviously, it shouldn't be more acceptable. So therefore, we have here a threefold definition of what constitutes proper speech. Whatever you say should be satyam, true. Whatever you say should be priyam, pleasant. Pleasant means not harmful. And finally, whatever you say should be hitam, beneficial, useful. And the message here is, if what you're going to say doesn't meet all three of these criteria, you shouldn't say it. If it's untrue, or if it's harmful, or if it's not beneficial. Is gossip beneficial? Okay. So if any one of these three are missing, then what? Just remain silent. And silence is going to come here a little bit later. By the way, suppose it was a rule that politicians had to follow this threefold rule. They couldn't lie, they couldn't say anything harmful, and they couldn't say anything. Everything they say is beneficial, but not to you. Whatever they say is beneficial to themselves. So if you forced all politicians to follow this threefold rule, they'd all be practicing maunam, silence. That would be a distinct improvement, don't you think? Okay, enough. And then, last two examples of vangmayam tapas, oral spiritual practice, swadhyaya, swa-adhyaya, self-study, scripturals, and in particular, scriptural study. Hopefully, most of you are studying something not just here on Saturday mornings. Hopefully at home you have something. Hopefully you have a chair in a quiet corner, and you have several spiritual books next to that chair, and hopefully you sit in that chair every day for a little bit of meditation and a little bit of spiritual study. That would be excellent. So swadhyaya and abhyasanam. Abhyasanam means repetition. And in ancient times, it used to mean recitation of the Vedas. Nowadays, very few people do daily recitation of the Vedas. So by extension, some form of prayer. which is which is done orally, vocally. So some kind of vocal prayer would be abhyasanam. So all of this is vāngmayam tapas. All of this is vachika is a more common expression. That is tapas, spiritual practice done with your voice. Then manasa tapas, spiritual practice is done with your mind. Mana prasara saumyatvam, mana prasara saumyatvam, maunamatma vinigraha, maunamatma vinigraha, bhava samshuddhyaret, bhava samshuddhyarityetata, bhava samshuddhyarityetata, tapo manasamuchyate, tapo manasamuchyate. Last line, tapas, which is manasam, mental tapas, mental spiritual practice. Uchyate is described like this, described how at the top. Mana prasadaha. Prasada means calmness here, tranquility. The typical example is when the surface of a pond has no ripples. We call that prasada. So when your mind is as calm as that pond, you have mana prasada, calmness. Also saumyatvam, gentleness. Some cultures have a value for the opposite of this saumyatvam. We call the word macho is often used to describe that. Paurushyam is a Sanskrit word for it. So some cultures or subcultures really have that value. I was just reading something on World War III. It turns out that Germany, after World War I came to an end, their cultural value was this macho-ness. It became for the entire country. Everyone embraced this intensity, this very, I can't call it maleness because males can be gentle, but this exaggerated aggression and expressions of power, etc. So that's the opposite here of gentleness, which is another manasa tapas, mental austerity, means, I think in American English, it would say, keep your cool. Also applies to mana prasada. Then, maunam. Maunam literally means silence. And you might wonder why maunam doesn't go with vaktapas. Well, vaktapas means controlling your speech. If you're not saying anything, there's nothing to control. Maunam properly belongs with manasa tapas because, and there's something very profound in the practice of maunam, and that is a wonderful spiritual practice is this. You don't have to practice maunam, but here's a practice you should try. Every time you're about to speak, ask yourself the question, why am I going to say this? Every time you're about to speak, this is not an easy practice, but you will learn so much. Every time you're about to speak, ask yourself the question, why am I about to speak? You'll be shocked. You'll be shocked. More than half of your speech, I think you'll discover, is meeting little needs, emotional needs. We seek to fulfill our emotional needs through speech. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but to do it blindly is a problem. There is a lack of self-awareness when we just, pardon the expression, when we just blabber and blabber. Sometimes to call attention to ourselves, to get the sympathy and attention of others, that's a sign of some kind of problem that needs to be addressed. If you really want to practice this, take a day and just choose not to speak. What will happen is you'll feel the urge to speak again and again and again and again, which allows you to do the practice I just described. Every time you feel that urge to speak, you can then trace back that urge. Why? What is it impelling me to want to speak? That is a practice of maunam. Then atma vinigraha. Vinigraha, control. Atma here simply means self-control. Doesn't mean Satchidananda Atma. Atma can simply mean oneself. So here, atma vinigraha, self-control. Self-control is a mental practice because it's all based on your intention and will. Is your intention and will focused on following Dharma, or is your intention and will directed elsewhere? If it's directed elsewhere, there's a significant problem. But when you're using your power of intention, your willpower, when you're using it to follow Dharma, that is Atma Vinigraha, that is self-control. Then last example of manasa tapas, and there could be many more. For each one of these categories, Sri Krishna simply gives a few prominent ones. So here the next category, or the next example of manasa tapas, he calls bhava samshuddhihi. Samshuddhihi, complete purity of bhava. Bhava here means your feelings, emotional purity. Purity of heart is a good translation. What is emotional purity? What is purity? You've heard me say this before. We always understand purity as the absence of impurity. So what are the emotional impurities which are removed for the sake of emotional purity? Purity of heart. How about envy, anger, frustration, resentment, hurt, all of that and more, to be free from all of those emotional impurities, which is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And you've heard me say before that emotional growth is a necessary component of spiritual growth. I'll say that again. Emotional growth is not optional. It goes hand in hand with spiritual growth. Iti, thus, etat, this is manasa tapas. Now, we've done first tapas, spiritual practices done with body, voice, and mind. Now we see the analysis in terms of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Shraddhaya paraya taptam, Shraddhaya paraya taptam, tapas tatrividham naraihi, tapas tatrividham naraihi, apalakankshi bhir yuktaihi, apalakankshi bhir yuktaihi, satvikam parichakshate, satvikam parichakshate. Satvikam parichakshate, this kind of tapas, parichakshate, is called satvika tapas. What kind is that? Look in the second line. Tat tapas, that tapas, which is trividham, of three kinds. What are the three kinds? Shariram, vachika, and manasa. So those three kinds of tapas, which are done by whom? Naraihi, by people. Tapas, which is, go up to the end of the previous line, tapas, which is tapdam, nice expression. Tapas is tapdam. Tapdam is an adjective meaning cooked. You cook your tapas. Heat cooks. Spiritual practice makes you mature. That's a metaphor, right? Just like heat cooks, but you put that potato in some boiling water for a few minutes. Takes a while, right? You really have to cook that potato before it becomes soft. In the same way, how much tapas do you need before you are before you are emotionally mature? So that's tapas, which is tapdam, which is literally here, tapas, tapdam, austerities which are performed, but it literally means heat that is cooked. So the cooking, cooked how? How should you cook? How should you perform spiritual practice? Paraya shraddhaya, with tremendous shraddha. Here, faith might not be the best meaning. How about commitment? Paraya shraddhaya, with tremendous commitment. You undergo this spiritual practice for the sake of transformation. This is done by naraihi, by people. Drop down to the end of the third line, by people who are yuktaihi. Yuktaihi can mean controlled, but here I would prefer to take it in the sense of people who are meditators. Those who perform yoga are yukta. There's some grammar here. Those who perform meditation can be said to be yukta. So yuktaihi, by those meditative people. Tapas, which is done, and here again, what is it that qualifies this tapas as being sattvika? Already it said is done with great commitment, but the key word here that qualifies tapas as being sattvika tapas, the key word here is apala kangshibihi. Tapas which is done by those who are palakangsha, desire for the fruits. Those who don't desire the fruits of tapas, they perform tapas with a sattvika attitude. Looks like something funny here. So if you don't have a desire for spiritual and emotional growth, then here it says, but why would you do tapas if you don't have a desire? Here we have to understand, we're talking about people who have already done tapas, people who are already spiritually and emotionally mature, people who are already well done or thoroughly cooked, so to speak. And the point here is when they have done these spiritual practices to become spiritually and emotionally mature, having reached that state of maturity, will they just stop all their spiritual practices? I'm done now? This is where the cooking metaphor doesn't work. When your potato is soft, you take it out of the boiling water. But when a spiritual practitioner has gained spiritual and emotional maturity, do they say, oh, thank God I don't have to meditate anymore. I don't have to pray anymore. I don't have to go to the temple anymore. Silly, right? They continue even though they don't need to. That's what Sri Krishna is describing here. So they continue to perform their spiritual practice after having gained the fruits of that spiritual practice, after having become spiritually and emotionally mature. So those are people who are apala kangshibihi. They perform tapas without desire for the fruits because they've already gained the fruits. That's the idea here. Then, what about Rajasa tapas? Satkara mana pujartam, satkara mana pujartam, tapodambhena chaivayata, tapodambhena chaivayata, kriyate tariha proktam, kriyate tariha proktam, Rajasam palamadhruvam, Rajasam chalamadhruvam. In the second line, tapo, the word is tapas. Tapas, which is, drop down a line, kriyate. Tapas, which is done. Tapas, which is performed. For what purpose? We've talked many times about the importance of intention. What is the intention? So the sattvika, those who are performing sattvika tapas, what is their intention? Not for the sake of the fruits, is what Sri Krishna said in a prior verse. What about those who have rajasa tapas? Their practice is rajasa. What is their intention? First line, satkara mana pujartam. They do it artam for the sake of what? Satkara. Honor. Mana. The respect of others, high regard of others. And puja, the reverence of others. They do it because they want to look holy, they want to look spiritual, and they do it, in the next line, dambhena, they do it pompously, they do it as ostentatiously, big complicated word, in a showy way. They want to show off how spiritual they are. Now that may seem a little odd, I don't know. I don't think I've met many people who are, a few, but generally, actually, usually the opposite is true. People don't want to show how spiritual they are because they're afraid of getting some negative judgment. That's the nature of our modern society, modern culture. But of course, in a more traditional society or traditional culture, if you are seen by your community members as someone who is so religious, so pious, they will have a lot of respect for you. Here's a more concrete example. Some of you may have traveled in India to these various, they call them tirthas, these spiritual centers in India. And in many of these places, like up in the Himalayas, you'll often find sadhus, monks, who sit there on the side of the road meditating, covered with this bhasma, this ash, and wearing about 18 pounds of rudraksha beads, holding this trishul, this trident, and they've got their kamandulu, and they're sitting on the side of the road meditating. What's wrong with this picture? If you want to meditate, will you sit on the side of a road to meditate? So anyway, the fact is that these sadhus financially support themselves in this way. They don't have a job, obviously. They need money for their expenses. So what do? During the tourist season, so up in the Himalayas, that's only about 4 or 5 months a year, they go and sit there on the side of the road with their begging bowl out, and they get some money. So, by the way, do you think it's easy to sit there on the side of the road wearing 18 pounds of rudraksha beads day after day after day after day? That's difficult. That's tapas. That's rajasa tapas. exactly as described here. So they're doing it for a rajasa reason. They want to impress you by their spiritual appearance, and for a very pragmatic reason, so you drop some money in their begging bowl. So that is rajasa tapas. So tapas, which is of that sort, in the middle of the third line, tat iha proktam, the tapas which is here in the world, which is done of that which is proktam. That kind of tapas, proktam, is considered rajasam tapas, and that kind of tapas is chalam. It is brief, that's a good translation, and adruvam, unsteady. So that sadhu sitting on the side of the road only sits there during the tourist season for obvious reasons. By the way, is anything said here that says it's wrong? Doesn't say it's wrong. Sri Krishna doesn't put it down. He's just saying it is rajasa. It is done with the intent of fulfilling your own desires. On the other hand, tamasa tapas is a problem. Let's see that. Mudha grahe natmano yata, mudha grahe natmano yata, pidaya kriyate tapaha, pidaya kriyate tapaha, parasyotsadanartam va, parasyotsadanartam va, tattamasamudahritam, tattamasamudahritam. Tat, that. Udahritam is given as an example of tamasa, tapas, which has the tapoguna, the quality of darkness, lethargy, and in particular, ignorance. Ignorance is the perhaps most significant characteristic of tamoguna, ignorance. And the examples, Sri Krishna gives kind of two examples here. In the second line, tapas, the last word, tapas, which is kriyate, which is done, how? Pidaya, in a painful manner. Tapas, which causes pain. Maybe the simplest example of that is somebody who fasts without food or water for an entire day or even longer. Do you know, that's harmful to the body. So to do any kind of tapas, including fasting, that is harmful to the body, why would someone do that? It's because in the first line, mudha grahena, it is done by one who is under the influence of ignorance. Mudha, mudhata. They're confused. Injuring your body cannot possibly contribute to your spiritual growth. Pretty obvious. Now, I'm not saying that fasting should be avoided, but any kind of fasting or spiritual practice that truly injures your body, that is counterproductive. That's what Sri Krishna says. But then people do that. And it's done atmanaha in the first line. They do it for themselves, thinking it's going to further them on their spiritual path, where in fact it causes harm to them. There was a I won't name the Swami, except to say it was a disciple of Swami Shivananda, who decided to spend the winter months in a cave near Gangotri. Gangotri is at an elevation, I think, of about 13,000 feet. Living through the winter months in a cave in Gangotri. And this was his thought of spiritual practice. it turned out they had to rescue him by helicopter because he was getting frostbite. Not a good idea, right? So the point I'm making here is that one's zeal, I guess is the right word for it, spiritual zeal can distort your reasoning and lead you to a spiritual practice which is unwise. And the example I just gave is perhaps a good example. There's one more example Sri Krishna gives of tamasa tapas, and that is tapas, which is third line, parasya utsadanartam, which is artam for the purpose of utsadana, hurting or killing parasya of another person. Tapas, which is done for the sake of hurting another people, this is pretty foreign to our modern thinking. In ancient times, there was a practice, maybe even today, I don't know. There's a practice called Vamachara Tantra. It's a use of this tantrika spirituality in an adharmic manner. And I won't go into details, but this seems to be a reference to the use of spiritual practices for the sake of causing harm to someone. How that works, I have no idea. I don't want to know, basically. Anyway, that Sri Krishna makes that reference of a second example of tamasa tapas. And that brings us to the last of these topics. The last topic is dana, charity. And Sri Krishna is going to explain what is sattvika dana, rajasa dana, and tamasa dana. And this stopped working again. That's interesting. That makes it work. Okay, here we go. Datavyamiti yadanam, datavyamiti yadanam, diyate nupakarine, diyate nupakarine, deshe kale cha patre cha, deshe kale cha patre cha, taddanam satvikam smritam, taddanam satvikam smritam. Once again, from bottom to top. Taddanam, that charity, satvikam smritam, is considered to be sattvika. What kind of danam which is sattvika? That which, actually pick up beginning of the second line, diyate, that which is given. Given to whom and when and where in the third line. Given deshe kale cha patre cha. Given patre. Given unto a deserving person. First criteria. Given to a deserving person, kale, at the right time, and deshe, at the right place. So a few weeks ago, there was a terrible, terrible earthquake in Turkey and part of Syria. And tens of thousands of people were rendered homeless by that earthquake. They live in very simple brick houses, and these brick houses come tumbling down. Many, many hundreds of them died in that earthquake. So to give financial support to those earthquake victims, that is, you're giving dana to one who is patra, one who is deserving of support. You're doing it kale, at the right time, after the earthquake, and deshe, in the right place. And not to give it, you know that in Syria, the portion of Syria that was not under government control, that is, the part of Syria that was under the control of the so-called rebels, the government initially prevented relief efforts from entering that portion of Syria. Terrible. Things like that happen. And that's a counter-example. So those poor people in Syria, in that time and place, and for those people, they absolutely deserved that care and that relief effort. So what constitutes sattvika danam? That which is given deshe, kale, patre, to the right person at the right time and place. In the third line, it is given anupakarine. Upakara is what you get in return. So to help someone so that they help you, and that's sometimes the case. I help. Think about, I don't want to get into politics here, but this country gives a lot of financial aid to other countries. You know that. Foreign aid, it's called. Out of the goodness of our hearts. I'm being sarcastic. So that foreign aid is given to other countries, sadly, not out of the goodness of our hearts, but as part of political manipulation to have those countries support the United States. I'm not saying it's wrong. It just is what it is, and what it is not is sattvika danam. All right? So charity, which is sattvika, is anupakarine, given to someone who's not going to give you something in return. And it is dana, which is given, first line, datavyam iti yaddanam. It is yaddanam, that charity which is given with what attitude? Datavyam iti. This is to be given. This is my responsibility. It is my dharmic responsibility to help others. Basic principle, if your needs are met and you have what they call disposable income. Disposable income means more than you need to meet your daily requirements. If you have that capability, you have a moral, ethical, dharmic responsibility to help others. That is sattvika danam. Then rajasa danam. Yattu pratyupakarhartam. Yattu pratyupakarhartam. Palamuddishya va punaha. Palamuddishya va punaha. Diyate chaparikklishtam. Diyate chaparikklishtam. Taddanam rajasam smritam. Taddanam rajasam smritam. Last line, taddanam is rajasam smritam, is considered rajasa. What kind of dana is considered rajasa? First line, yattu. That dana which is prati upakarartam, done for getting something in return, like America's foreign aid given to others. So rajasam danam, again, it's not being criticized here. It's better than no danam, right? But it is with an ulterior motive, and that's what makes it rajasa. Or, that va in the second line, or va punaha, or dana which is given palam uddishya, keeping in view the palam, the fruits, keeping in view what you get out of that charity. What you get out of your charity as a minimum is good karma. So to do charity for the sake of accumulating good karma is not wrong. That's not what he says, right? He's not criticizing it, but he is pointing out that if you do charity for the sake of accumulating good karma, he says it is rajasa. Another example of it is someone who gives charity because they can deduct it on their taxes. Don't ask. I don't know if the tax rules still permit that, but anyway, that would be an example of giving a donation for the sake of the fruit. So diyatecha, that dana which is given, either wanting something in return or for the sake of results, or the third example is given here, pariklishtam, that which is given with difficulty, that which is given reluctantly. A little hard to find examples of this. Some of you, if you travel in India, very often beggars will come, and sometimes you give money to the beggar, not to help them, but to make them go away. That's an example, pariklishtam. To give the money to the beggar because you have disposable income and this person is needy, that's sattvika dana. But to give money to a beggar to make them go away would be considered here rajasa dana. That leads us to the last kind of dana, tamasa dana, which is problematic, and you'll see how. Adesha kale yaddanam, adesha kale yaddanam, apatrebhyascha diyate, apatrebhyascha diyate, asatkritam avagnatam, asatkritam avagnatam, tattamasamudahritam, tattamasamudahritam, tattamasam. Now we're going to, and that word yaddanam in the first line gets connected down here at the bottom. Yaddanam, that charity, tat tamasam udahritam. It is considered tamasa. What kind of tamasa? What kind of charity is considered tamasa in the second line? Apatrebhyaha diyate. That charity which is diyate, given to apatrebhyaha, someone who doesn't deserve support. And looking for a good modern example of that, it's a little bit of a jarring example, but there are people who give financial support to organizations engaged in terroristic activities. It happens. There have been cases of mosques in Britain and elsewhere that channel funds to various terrorist organizations. Or another example would be, you know that in the Middle East are many of these madrasas, these Islamic schools. Some of them are okay, but some of them are known to be, for lack of a better term, terrorist training camps. They start training them at the age of 7. And so to support such a madrasa that's engaged in that kind of activity would be a very clear example of giving charity to the wrong people. Also, charity which is, in first line, adesha kale, charity which is given in the wrong place and time. So to send money to Turkey 10 years from now, it's too late. So the money needs to be given in the right place and time when it's needed. And the last example Sri Krishna gives in the third line, charity which is given asatkritam, disrespectfully, avagnatam, with scorn. And here again, a little difficult to come up with a good example, but suppose suppose you find a homeless person who hasn't been able to take a bath for several months, who hasn't been able to wash or change their clothes for several months, and you see this homeless person, and suppose, I don't think you'll do this, suppose you're disgusted. Most people wouldn't be, but suppose someone finds it very disgusting that this homeless person, and gives them Here, here's some money, go get a bath and some proper clothes. So to give the money accompanied by that negative judgment. That's the key here. It's the negative judgment that comes along with the donation. That would be tamasa, tapas. And that concludes our discussion. And we made it through. I wanted to cover this whole section, and we did. We got our three kinds of tapas, right? We have both sharira, vachika, and manasa tapas, and then we had sattvika, rajasa, and tamasa. Same applied to dana, and that brings us to the end of the section. There's one more section in chapter 17, which we'll see in our next class. Since we're talking about dana here, let me just take a moment with our final announcements, just to thank all of you for your dana, for your charities. I think giving money to support this ashram, I think qualifies as sattvika. I don't think it's rajasa, it's certainly not tamasa. So this is, and anyway, it's much appreciated. It allows us to pay all our bills and keep everything very nice and well maintained. So I want to thank all of you for your donations over the years. Also, many of our students online. I'm amazed. We get donations now from all over the world through PayPal. So thank you to all of our online students who give donations. So I'm very grateful for all of that, Dana, for all of those donations. There's another kind of donation in addition to financial donation. Here at our ashram, many of you are giving donations in the form of seva, of volunteer activities, volunteer work. You donate your time and effort and skills to help run the ashram. As you know, we don't have a paid staff, so everything here is done by volunteers. I'm very grateful to all of you who do continue to volunteer. After in this post-pandemic time, we find that we still don't have quite enough we don't have enough volunteers. We need a few more volunteers so we can function a little bit more effectively. So if you would like to volunteer, or if you are a current volunteer, we're going to have a very brief volunteer meeting after this class. So immediately after we'll finish with our closing prayers, then immediately afterwards, you can go to the back corner of the hall. You will meet with Vasanti ji and Jim. Is Jim? Yeah, Jim. You can meet with them after class, and they'll talk a little bit about the volunteer work to be done here. That'll be very helpful. I'll remind you that tomorrow, Sunday, we have our Vedanta class at 10 o'clock and Satsanga question answer at 11 o'clock. Come and join us, and we'll conclude now with our prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavhidam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utibasira Saranam Om Ganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah. Sarve Santu Niramayah. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Asato Ma Sadgamaya. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.